Hello everyone and welcome to part 2 base color of the wooden floor tutorial. Just a quick overview here. So this one's actually pretty simple in terms of base color. We really just have to worry about our plank color here, the long planks, our square planks, our metal color, um, and then like the crevices between the planks, and obviously our highlights and stuff, but that's pretty easy. Alright, so let's jump into it. Alright, so I've gone ahead and I've turned off all the blend modes so that we start with this and we'll unlock them as we progress. So to get started, we need to pull from our flood fill here, where all our flood fill stuff is going on. And we're going to pull from the flood fill, and then we're going to pull into a flood fill to B-box size and a flood fill to random grayscale. So we'll start with the B-box here. So I think we've covered this node in a different tutorial, but basically what it does is it reads your flood fill, and based on the bounding box size, it will give it a color. So these planks are relatively the same, so it gives them one color, and the smaller ones are kind of grouped together. So this is a good way to isolate the long versus the square planks. And then from the B box size, we're going to have a select, a histogram select, and these settings are going to make the long boys white and everything else black, and then the small boys here are white. So then we have two separate masks. So we have our long and our square or small, and then down here we're just going to do an auto levels from the flood fill to random grayscale. So yeah, B-box size is a very good node when you have a bunch of like scaling sizes. So if you have something really small and there's like a bunch of other things that kind of get bigger and bigger and bigger, and this is a really good way to capture specific ones. Okay, so now that we have this, we're gonna hold off and go over here. So I'm gonna move this guy over here and get rid of this guy. So we have two uniform colors. So this one, just gonna round it up so it's easier for you guys. And then this one. Okay, so this one's gonna feed into the background and the top one into the foreground, into a blend, set the copy. And then we're gonna do a Perlin noise here and into an auto levels. And then we're going to have a vector warp grayscale, and then that's going to feed into the opacity. And then we're going to pull from after the distance, the random color and distance, pull from that, just like we've been using in all of our height stuff. Plug that in there, and then I have my vector warp grayscale set to 10. As long as it's at least 1, which I think is the default, it's fine, but I like to make sure it's like something a little like 10. Okay, so then that gives us this, which is just like some base variation on our wood. And then from the auto levels here, I go into a transform 2D and I just rotate it 90 degrees, nothing special here, into another vector warp. And you have to make sure that you are doing the rotating before the vector warp, otherwise you're going to end up rotating this. So like if we rotate this, so we've rotated 90 degrees, so now our entire texture has rotated and now it's not aligning with this. So if we look here, this is what we're using to warp. Now you can see here that they're not the same. So make sure you rotate and then do the vector warp. Okay, so that's going to go into a blend here, copy, set to 1, and then we have two other colors, which is just kind of the same version of these, but darker. Now you can also do the color picker and then click on the video, and that should work, but you can also see the values here. Should be 5. 49.5. And then we're going to add this. So now this is also a copy, and now we're going to use our mask here, our little plank mask. So just pull from that, goes into the opacity, so then we go from this to this. And then using that same road or highway, we're going to pull into a blend set to multiply, because now we're going to work on our variation for our small planks. So if I turn this on, you can see here that some of them are darker than others. So we're actually using our random grayscale after the auto levels. That's plug it into the background, and then we have our mask here on the top, and we're multiplying so that we don't get the planks here, and we're using this mask. Once we have that, feeding that into a gradient map. I could have done it the same way I did here, feeding it into like 2 uniforms, but I want to show you guys different ways of doing the same thing. So we have a gradient map here. I'm just going to hit this, and then here you can see the values and the position for this color, and the position and color settings for this one. So then that's going to go into the top, and then we're obviously going to use the same mask. So then we have the same variation, so they're not all the same color. And then we basically repeat the same process using the other mask for the longer planks. So we're going to pull from this mask, and since we're multiplying, it doesn't matter where it is, it's going to give us the same result. And then we're also going to pull from this guy again. That's going to go into the background, and then the long boy mask into the foreground. Multiply, same thing. So now we're only working with the long planks into a gradient. And now we have varying colors. And we do lose a little of the spotting, which is good because this would have been a little too noticeable. So I just wanted to be like subtle. Same with the variation. And then here I just have a HSL just to like adjust my color. So I don't have to go back here and, you know, edit all of these. I can just kind of do like an overall blanket. So here I just make it a little bit brighter. So I just change the lightness to 0.51. And then here if you wanted to change like the hue or the color of the wood, you can make them a little more red. If I go to like, it's very sensitive. So like maybe like 0.495. You want to do like a different color. But let's go back. We're just making them a little bit brighter. So then that's it for that. Now we're going to move on to our surface color. So we're going to add some variation on top so it's not just flat colors. So we can see here the difference. So we go from that to this. So to get started, we're going to pull from whatever this is, which is from Surface Noise 3. We're going to pull from it. And then we're going to do a ambient occlusion, HBAO, and a normal. Normal is set to 15. From the ambient occlusion, we're going to do a histogram scan. And into a copy blend. And the histogram scan is going to feed into the opacity. And then for the foreground, we're going to split from the main path into an HSL. And we're just going to make this HSL a little bit brighter. And then we're using this mask to get this result. It's just a brighter version of itself. And it's only being applied to the white here. And therefore we get that. Alright, so then let's go to the crevice color. So now we're adding some depth. So for this, we take the ambient occlusion and we split up here and then we invert it because I want the crevice stuff to be white instead of black. And then once we have the invert, I'm going to use a scan to kind of play around with the value, with the range. So we go from this to this. And then I feed that into the opacity again. And then I do the same thing I did here. I take from the main path. And then I do a darker version of the main color. And then we get this. So you can see that like this part of the wood is getting a little darker because it's the crevice. Dirt and stuff has been accumulating there. All right, and then we have surface color 2, where we just add a little bit of like more highlight here. And to get this thing, we have our normal here, and then we're going to do a curvature smooth into a histogram scan. We're going to pull from this scan, and that's going to go into a subtract blend. It's going to go into the background. Then we have a Gaussian spots here. Gaussian spots 1 into our vector warp. And then we're going to obviously use the same orange road that we've been using for everything here. So just pull from that. And then here we subtract because we're subtracting these spots from this so that we can break up our highlights so we don't have it. So we go from this to this. That way there's some variation in the highlights and it's not like everything's not evenly highlighted. Yeah, so you can see here that it's like kind of all flowing, but with this we kind of add some breakup to the flow. Just kind of add more, some more visual detail. So once we have that, we have crevice color 02. Let's turn that back on. So then we just do something like a deeper pass on the crevices, just to continue to add more depth. For this, we're going to use this other normal here, set to intensity of 10, into a curvature Sobel. Curvature Sobel gives us tighter curve. So if we look at smooth, this is a lot smoother, and this is a bit tighter. So we're going to take that Sobel here at 0.5 intensity into a scan, into an invert, again, so we can work with so we can turn the deep parts that we want to work with into white, into a levels here, and I play around with the settings. Let me just round these up for you guys. And then that's going to feed into a subtract blend here into the background. And then when I take this Gaussian spots, oh, I just realized I forgot to add another vector warp in here. Let me just slide everything over real quick. Let me just line up my connection here so it's nice and clean. All right, so yeah, so always make sure you're breaking up your noise. You don't want your noise to kind of run from one plane to the other. So now we're going to subtract those two, like I said, and we're doing the same thing that we did here. We just want to break up that mask so it's not just like even. And then we blur it a little bit. And now we got that. So you can see here it's starting to take some more visually interesting shape now. And now we're going to move on to our base metal. So we're going to work on the metal coloring now. And for this, we're going to start with our metal mask here. The blend after the scan. We're going to pull from that. And then it's going to split into two paths. The first one's going to be a flood fill into a random grayscale, into a gradient map. Just two colors from one to the other. It's just a smooth transition. And this way, all of the metal pieces have a different metal value. So you can see or color value. So this one's darker than this one, and then there's like a bit of more of a variation, but it's subtle because you don't want one nail to be like black and then the other one to be like super white. And then from that split here, we're going to go into the opacity to tell it, where to paint those colors. All right, so then we have our metal color 1. This is where we just kind of start adding some noise on top just to kind of break up the flatness that we just placed. And then we start with a moisture noise, a scan, and then because this is more like a stylized texture, I don't want super like sharp details, so I blur it a little bit. And then I increase the tiling. You can also increase the scale here, but it takes more time to compute than if you just increase the tiling with the transform 2D about 4 times. And then that's going to feed into the background of this blend set to multiply. And then we're going to use this mask so that we can isolate everything else and just have the noise where the mask is. So we multiply those two, that and that. And then that's going to feed into a levels here where I play around with the values. That's going to go into the opacity of this guy. And then I'm using this uniform color here. And then if we get close, we can see the change. And the change is going to be more noticeable in some more than others, because obviously if the base color is darker than this, then this color is going to stand out more. But if these two colors are about the same, that's going to be less noticeable. So you can see here it's more noticeable than like here, but that's fine. Okay, so then after that we have metal color 2. We just add another little layer on top. Probably too bright, but that's okay. Again, it's going to show up more in some areas than in others, because it's based on also like where this noise is landing. But okay, so then I split from this guy. Actually, I'm gonna rotate this one more time. There we go. So yeah, so these guys are kind of going vertically, right? They kind of have a more of an up and down shape. So I split from that, and then I rotate it 90 degrees, so they're more of like a horizontal shape. So now they're kind of going left to right. And then I do the same thing I did here, where I multiply versus the mask. And then feed that into the opacity. And then we just add like another little layer. And this might be too bright, so let's go down to like 0.6. Alright, so now we're not just dealing with a flat color, we have some variation on top. So then after that, we have our metal highlight. So like these nails have been hammered in, so I want there to be some wear. So we have a copy blend here as usual, and then from the main road here, we split into an HSL, and I just make it brighter because I just want the metal color that is under it to just be brighter. And then we take okay. So to get started there, we need to go follow this path here, which leads to this. I'm not sure if I did this in the height, because I don't know if we needed it, but let's just make it again. So let's follow this guy. Okay, so from this guy, which is like where all the metal center plate stuff is. So it's a multiply set to 0.1, so look for that blend. Take that. Let me do this nicely so you guys can follow it, because it's probably easier for me than it is for you guys. So we're gonna move that into a blend here, and then here we're going to reunite and add with our other add linear blend here, where we kind of add all of the nails after we like rotated them and stuff in the previous episode. So we're gonna add those two together, and then from there, now that they're added, I'm gonna go up to here into a scan. And then here you can see that I'm kind of like focusing using the scan on the edges here. And then I do another scan on top of that. And then from there, you can see that these high points are brighter than the low points here. So then I use that along with this to kind of get like this highlight. And that's going to go on top of everything. And then we have our scratches color, which is just a brighter version of itself, because obviously the scratch is reaching the like fresher wood. So we take the brighter version, or we make a brighter version of itself into the foreground, into a copy set to 1. And then for the scratches scan here, we're going to pull from this blend, the subtract blend, before the levels and before the invert. So we're going to pull from this guy into a scan, into the opacity. And then you can see here that it's just a brighter version of itself. And then we're almost done. So then once we have our scratches color, we're going to do our overall highlights, and this is something that we do for all the materials, as you guys know. And we're just going to take from this, which is the last bit of height information. We're going to pull from that into a normal, set to 25, very high, into a curvature smooth, into just a default gradient map, feed that on the foreground, set to overlay, set to 0.2, and then we get some more depth. And it's very subtle. I don't want it to be too strong, but you can play around with your preferences. And then we have our overall highlight, which is kind of like our finer. And then for this, we're going to pull from this normal and split down here. I don't know why this guy's here. Might have forgotten to delete him. And from that normal, we're going to go into a curvature Sobel. Again, into another default gradient map and just plug that onto the top. And the reason why we have the gradient map is to transform the grayscale into a color output. And then we have an opacity of 0.2 here. And what you could do here is also do kind of like the subtraction method, where you subtract from this so that your highlights don't run everywhere, and you can kind of break it up as well if you'd want to do that. And then that's our overall highlight 2. And then we have our crevice color, and that's where like the dirt is supposed to be here. So we're going to pull from before the scratches, actually, because my thinking here is that the scratches kind of came after, so you wouldn't really have much dirt there, but it could also come after if you'd like. But in our case, I went with before, so I would have before the scratches. So I'm pulling from here before the scratches are added or subtracted, I guess, in this case. So I do an HBAO ambient occlusion into a levels, into an invert grayscale, and that goes into the opacity here. And then I just use this uniform color here. Fix that. Boom. And then we go from this to this. And then we have our deeper crevice color. And for this, I use the dirt node, which I guess you could have just taken another scan after this and then just kind of tighten it up and then use that, but I went the difficult way. So I'm going to pull from this ambient occlusion, HBAO, split it into the ambient occlusion of this dirt node, and then the curvature smooth here is going to go into the curvature slot input here. And then you can see my dirt settings here is very light, nothing too crazy. Actually, this shouldn't be 1, this should be like 0.5. I think I was playing around with it and I forgot to change it back. So then from our dirt, we're going to go into a blur to kind of blur it a bit so it's not so harsh. Into a bevel so that it fades inward, because I'm using a negative distance here. So we go from this to this, into the opacity, and then we have our uniform color here. I don't know why it keeps changing to like super. There we go. Okay, so then we have this, so it's kind of showing like the deeper ends, so it's got a nice little transition. And then that's obviously for roughness. So that's for the next episode. We're going to be doing roughness and metallic because metallic's super short. And then once we have all this done, now the only thing that's left is the holes in the middle metal plates. So I'm gonna unhide that, and that's what I call abyss, and that's supposed to be like, you know, darkness in there. So I just have a solid black into the foreground, copy, and then for this histogram scan, we are pulling from over here. So this is where we made the plates. So we have the shape, the transform 2D, the blur into the tile. So this is where we have 4 of them. So then I pull from that. Into the scan, and then I just make sure. Well, here I actually played around with it. So I was looking here and I was like just playing around with this. And obviously I wanted to kind of be not here, obviously here where it's kind of covering the wood. And then we get our little abyss here. You probably don't even need it, but you know, I want to make sure that it's dark in there. And then obviously we have our sharpen, which I like how it makes everything kind of pop as well. And then that is our base color. So we went from this to this. Super simple, nothing too crazy. But that's it for base color. And next episode, we're going to cover roughness, which is even shorter, I believe, and metallic, which is just this. All right, guys. Hope you guys learned something new, and I'll see you guys in the next part. Peace.